Welcome back to American Medicine Today. So a moving new book tells a very personal story of one extraordinary service member who suffered a debilitating spinal cord injury while on active duty and how he was able to bounce back and triumph over adversity. Joining us is retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Cozad, author of Relentless Positivity, a common veteran battling uncommon odds. Thank you for joining us.
Kimberly, good morning. Great to be here today. Thank you.
Great to be with you, and thank you for your service to our country.
Yes, thank you.
So we wanted to talk about your extraordinary military career. You were the Navy's senior leader in the White House Situation Room during the whole bin Laden raid. That had to have been intense. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, it was amazing. You know, I was there. I was a senior Navy captain at the time, and during the raid itself, I was the director of operations, but the senior military guy there in the situation, and you know, just a phenomenal experience to be able to see that whole thing come together over a series of very secretive briefings, very closely hold information to culminate to what the public saw with that one picture of an Air Force one-star general and the national security staff, to include President Obama, sitting around him during that historic takedown.
Why don't you take us back to the actual day that you became injured?
Absolutely. So, there's an old adage that goes along something like a single moment can change your entire life forever. And, for me, that happens on March 16th of 2018. We lived in a historic home. It was government housing at the time. I was the senior admiral here on base at NAS Pensacola, where we still live today. And I was the last one to go up to bed that night. And as best as I can recall, really narrow steps with a very low handrail. And I'm 6'5", and to the best of my being able to piece this together, I think I fell off the second or third step. Landed on my back and shattered two vertebrae, T12 down to L2, so the very lower back, and can remember very little about it. I was in shock. I can remember vividly, though, the frustration, the fear of not being able to move, not being able to get myself, and just not understanding that.
So if everyone had already gone to bed, I mean, did you lay there for a while? Were you able to crawl to a phone? I mean, how did you get help?
Yeah, I've got a pretty loud voice. As soon as I wrapped my mind around the fact that, my lower body wasn't working, I called for my wife and she came down and immediately called 911. And the next memory that I have is waking up in the ICU the next day, probably about dinner time.
And so what were you told? What was the diagnosis and then the treatment?
Yeah, the diagnosis, I mean, that was absolutely life-changing. The doctor came in with both my wife and I, and, I knew something wasn't right. But he used the words for the first time, paraplegic spinal cord injury. And he gave us a diagnosis that based on the severity of the injury and the trauma to my spinal cord, I'd never be able to get out of a wheelchair again. I'd never be able to stand, wouldn't be able to walk, wouldn't be able to do anything that, I had normally done. And, prior to that, I'd spent 32 years as an active duty Navy pilot. So I was healthy. I was relatively successful, loved to be outdoors. And, as far as I was concerned, nothing good in front of me other than my Navy career. I loved wearing the uniform. And, then the imaginable happened.
I can't imagine being in a situation like you were in. So speaking of the title of the book, Relentless Positivity, how did you dig within and find that determination to not let it drag you down and send you over the edge?
Yeah, I knew right away that, I had a decision to make, and, I could either lay in bed and feel sorry for myself. And, a lot of people in a similar situation look behind and say, why me? Why me? But, I really took this as an opportunity to figure out, what's my new purpose? What positive can I make out of this? And so that's exactly what I did. My motivation was my faith in God, my family. And, the very first time I went into physical therapy, and they pulled me up in this very mechanical machine. So I had seat belts, chest bands on, I had things around my waist, and it pulled me up out of my wheelchair. And for the first time I was standing, and, I had this crazy notion that, hey, I want to return to full duty in the Navy. And those things, kind of joined together to be my inspiration to, to take my first step, to teach myself, just like a 1-year-old, how to mechanically walk again when I had no feeling below my waist. And I didn't stop with one step. I became a step counter. I used a walker to a point where, after 6 weeks of physical therapy, I was able to return home. And to the point where I am today, I was able to continue to serve on active duty as the Navy's, most senior handicapped officer for 2.5 years, and retired in 20. But today I use a walker most of the time. I use a wheelchair when I go through airports. I can drive myself to work, and I work full time as the CEO of the Naval Aviation Museum Foundation. So
Awesome.
life is good, and I feel like I've got a lot to give back.
So how much motion do you have? I mean, obviously you just said that you can walk fairly well with a walker. How much feeling do you have in your lower extremities?
Absolutely none. So I've
Still.
taught myself to pivot, to shift, to do things just from muscle memory. But you could drop a brick on my foot and I wouldn't know it.
What about what you went through made you really want to give back to the public?
Well, I started with adaptive athletics through the Navy, and I was the senior member of the Navy's DoD Wounded Warrior Team in Tampa, Florida, a few years ago. And I got into this position where I felt really empowered, and I felt like I had a positive message to tell other people like me who had suffered catastrophic injuries or illnesses. And I've done that over the last couple of years, just on an individual basis. And I've got probably 20 folks that I work with, that I mentor. But I saw this book as an opportunity to, potentially reach more lives. And so that's why I set out to write it, just so I could share that story and hopefully motivate and inspire other people who are going through circumstances in their life. And those circumstances don't have to be significant injuries like mine. It could be something like, the kids are having trouble in school, or you're moving to a new area and you just feel like you're isolated, or maybe you're a cancer patient. So, to try to motivate and inspire others going through, their specific challenge in life.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you how important that is to have a strong support system anytime you have either an injury or an illness or anything like that.
I think so. I mean, for me, that was super important. I had my family, and I had my Navy family as well, and the community of Pensacola really rallied around us to help us. And so, I look back to my career in naval aviation, and the toughness that imbued in me, just in the fiber of my body. And so, all the proceeds for this book go back to the Naval Aviation Museum here in Pensacola, Florida, so we can tell stories about not people like Kyle Cozad, but stories about people who have been common men who have done uncommon things in the service of our country. So real heroes.
Thank you for sharing this book with us and giving everyone inspiration. Retired U.S. Navy Admiral Kyle Cozad, author of Relentless Positivity, a common veteran battling uncommon odds. Thank you for being on the program.
Great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Check us out anytime on the American Medicine Today YouTube page, and we'll be back next Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Newsmax.